Hello, it's Paul Driscoll here, aka The Drisk, from the RGDS podcast. And this is me continuing my series on the best game of a letter, Arcade Edition. And this is for the letter W. My word, we're nearly there, boys and girls. We're nearly at the end of the alphabet and all the games. For those who don't know, this is a series where I imagine per letter on a system. If I could only choose 5 games for that letter and nothing else, so in this case for the arcade, what would I choose? So I'm not coming at it from what's most historically important or beloved, but personally for me, what 5 games would I choose if all others would disappear? And I must admit, I would love to see all of these games that I'm choosing in one place. That would make me so happy. But of course, I'll give loads of honourable mentions because there are fantastic games that I also love, just not in my top 5. And, I'll give those a mention as well. Anyway, as I say, this series is a bit of fun and just really an excuse to highlight some awesome games to try the next time you're on your fully loaded emulator device. And hopefully there'll be new ones mentioned here that you might want to try, or perhaps old classics that you'd forgotten. And that's what it's all about. It's really about you having an encapsulated form to replay and try new games. Hopefully some of these games will speak to you. Now for the letter W, it's got some fantastic games for such a letter. That's quite small really, but I think you're going to love my choices. And I'll be the first to say on a different day, some of the games that only made my honourable list could have easily made my top 5. I really was playing with nostalgic goggles when playing and making my choices. Talking of nostalgic goggles, let's go on to my 5th choice. Okay, and for my 5th choice, I've chosen the real nostalgic gem for me with Technos's 1991 classic WWF WrestleFest. Now, as a kid in the 80s, I adored WWF wrestling, and this for me was its peak popularity with such wrestlers as Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior, Legions of Doom and Mr. Perfect, to name but a few. Now, Technos had taken this lucrative license before with the fantastic WWF Superstars, but in 1991 they released this sequel, WWF WrestleFest, and they outdid themselves. It has bigger sprites, perfect pixel representations of all the wrestlers of the day that you were desperate to play as a kid. And it even included a Royal Rumble mode for all-out action, putting all these wrestlers in fighting all at once for absolute all-out carnage. Now it's made by director Shinichi Saito, who is one of the designers and principal designers of Double Dragon, and it's got character designer of people like Hiroshi Shibata. Now he would go on to be the lead designer of Akami, the Bayonetta games, and also a designer on Resident Evil 4. So there's some talent right there, and you can see this game developing talent shining through with every person involved in this game, through every Hulk Hogan glistening sweated paw drawn out lovingly as you smash and bash through this game. Now, okay, objectively the game was a total button basher. It only has 2 buttons, meaning that there's very little skill in the game, and quite frankly the ability to replenish your health by just inserting more coins means that those rich enough or not strong-willed enough on MAME devices, the game's never really a challenge. But it's not about that for me. I mean, let's be honest, it's not really the gameplay, it's just seeing the gorgeous graphics and encapsulation of these wrestlers so belovingly portrayed, and this is why it's such a favourite among people. And never before or since has our wrestling heroes been so well depicted and characterised in pixelated form. Outside of Ocean's 1991 release of WWF WrestleMania the same year, which was even worse playability wise, no one's ever tried to capture these wrestlers in such beautiful pixel form, and I think that's a real shame because personally I think it would be huge if someone would do that. My inner kid still dreams of a WWF license version, but failing that, when I see open BOR, I'm often dreaming that somebody who's got a lot more talent than I does hand-drawn versions of all these wrestlers and comes out with an extended version of WWF WrestleFest with perhaps, more buttons and a bit more skill to the gameplay. A boy can dream. Yeah, so it's bizarre. This never ever saw a home port. I never really understood why. It would have been huge. So really the only ways to play it is in the arcades, if you're lucky enough to find it. Arcade Club in Bury, yes, that place again that I keep shouting, does have it. But outside of that, really, MAME is your only go-to, really, which is such a shame for this game. Okay, let's move on to my fourth choice. And after much toing and froing, I decided it has to be Warlords, released in April 1981, although it does say it was developed in 1980. Now, it's made by Atari, and it's basically a 4-player Pong game meets Breakout. Each person moves their bat along the corner of their castle, and they must bounce fireballs that's released by dragons that come onto the screen. Miss the fireball on your castle and it will destroy some bricks, making it ever closer to you reaching the castle being destroyed and the game over. Basically, if they break through the wall and reach the inner core, it's game over for you as the player. It's got other great things, such as you can actually catch and then release the fireball by pressing the fire button, and that gives a tactical element and ganging up on certain people that are perhaps better skilled than others. But it's just so intuitive. I mean, playing it with the paddle controllers makes it so much fun to play. It just doesn't feel the same if you're playing it on mouse or joystick. The other thing that's great is, of course, as the game continues, Dragon comes back and fires more fireballs, so you get multiple fireballs coming at you, which really ups the ante, and quickly you're going into full mayhem. Now, it was designed by Greg Rivera and Norm Avella, and they'd worked on such classics as Star Wars, the Atari arcade game, and Empire Strikes Back, which was just really an add-on to that game, and Roadrunner. I mean, to name but a few, and Warlords is another all-time classic for them. Now, the game did see many solid ports on multiple platforms back in the day, such as the Atari 2600 is a very good version, and recently it does appear in arcade form on the My Arcade Atari Game Station, which with the paddles that you get on the controller makes it almost as good as it was back in the day. Beyond that, though, you're quite limited. You can use a PC mouse in MAME, which is a bit of a poor substitute, but really the only way to play it is on the original arcade hardware. And thankfully, yes, again, Arcade Club in Bury and Leeds as well has the Warlords game in all its glory. I think Leeds now has the Cocktail 4-player cabinet, which is the best way to play it. It used to be in Bury, but it's now moved. The 2-player version, which does have the overlay of the graphics, which makes it look prettier, is in Arcade Club Bury, but to be honest, it's that Cocktail cabinet 4 players a way to play it. I mean, some of my fondest memories of this game is going to Arcade Club in Bury and playing it with 3 other like-minded people from the RGDS podcast, and just playing it with a few sort of drinks is just so much fun, and it's the way it needs to be played. Okay, let's move on to my third choice, and this is probably lesser known to a lot of people and quite a modern arcade game choice as well, but it is Wacky Races, released in 2009 by Band Presto and developed in 2008. This is a gloriously realised Mario Kart clone. It lets you take all of the Wacky Racer characters from Hanna-Barbera, and it's across 6 well-designed tracks. In many ways, this is, I think, a better and more realised version, more streamlined and therefore better, over the Dreamcast version, and I love the Dreamcast version. Like that game, it still has the cel-shaded look of the cartoon, and it does look absolutely spectacular, and I really wish they would release this in the home and it didn't just stay languishing in the arcades. This version of the game has a constant timer and checkpoint, so it's a bit like Outrun in that regard. So it always keeps your adrenaline pumping as you try to get first in the race. It's one that I would be desperate to see in the flesh in the arcades. You know, Arcade Club, please consider getting it. I think it would be a real hit for people. Thankfully, the emulator TechnoParrot does have it emulated, so there is a way to play this game if you wish. But have you seen the cabinet of the Wacky Races with the Dick Dastardly's car? Oh, I'd love to see it in the flesh. Anyway, let's move on to my second choice, and I have chosen Wonder Boy, released in April 1986 by Sega. The original game is incredibly simple, with force scrolling and just simple jumping, and if you've got the weapon, throwing axes to take out the enemies. Really, it's all platforming condensed and boiled down to its purest form. And I think that's why I love the game. It just draws you back in its simplicity to just replay and learn those levels to get that little bit further each time. It's a surprisingly addictive gem, and one that probably, you know, I know a lot of people that overlook it just because of its simplicity. Now, the game has seen many home ports over the year, with Master System version being a real standout. But today I would probably pick up the Anniversary Wonder Boy collection for it to go on sale, because it's ridiculously priced. It's like 44 quid. But try to hold off not getting the inferior Wonder Boy collection version done by different developers. It's just not as good as the Anniversary collection. The Anniversary collection has like a series with all the ports of every different version, so it's a real love letter for Wonder Boy fans, and it came out on the Switch and PS4. Of course, if you just want this game, Arcade Archives has it sold individually, and their emulation is fantastic. Of course, you can play it yourself on MAME emulation or your emulator device, and you know, that's a perfect way to play it as well. This is another, of course, that's in Arcade Club in Bury, so that's a great way to enjoy it as well. Okay, that brings me on to my number one choice for the letter W. And for me, it has to be Wangan Midnight Maximum Tune 3DX Plus. My word, those Japanese love their long names, don't they? It's released by Namco Bandai in 2008. And, you know, to a lot of people, they might have passed them by this series because it's little known outside of Japan. I mean, basically what it is, it's based on a manga series on Japanese illegal racing, and you know, they race around Tokyo and other cities in Japan. Now, there's obviously been loads of different versions in the arcades and a few home ports in Japan of some of the earlier titles, but I've decided, you know, and it's been going on since 2001, but I decided this version because whilst it's in the middle, I mean, they went up to Maximum Tune 6. For me, this is the one that I personally fell in love with. It's got the perfect balance of tracks, music, and, you know, for the uninitiated, it's really weird with this game. It sort of mixes in visual novel elements with great inner city racing, and it plays on getting into the behind cars for drift to give you that extra speed. Now, it does take, because of its narrative of the visual element, the visual novel element, it does take liberties with rubber banding and scripted moments. I mean, you could be masses of the way ahead and then suddenly the other cars are overtaking you, not because you've done anything wrong, but because at that point in the race required them to overtake you. So, you know, I mean, that may annoy some people, but if you don't think about too much about how the sausage is made, just see it as what it was intended for, which is these scripted moments, and this rubber banding is to give you that sort of photo finish, just beating the other car excitement. And that, for me, is what makes this such a blast to play. And it does fry my brain that the people involved in this game did that total misstep, in my opinion, of the Mario Kart GP arcade game by Namco, which I thought was a real missed opportunity. And one of the best elements of this game, Wangan Midnight Maximum Tune 3DX Plus, never tire of that saying that, is the amazing music by Yuzo Koshiro. Yes, he of Streets of Rage, music's fame, and loads of games, Axe Razor, I could go on. I mean, he's one of the best gaming musicians out there. And to hear his fantastic music, I mean, I adore the soundtrack to this. In fact, I genuinely have it often play on Spotify or YouTube music to enjoy, you know, his music of this game series. He's just does music that I love. But imagine sitting in the proper cabinet with speakers either side of your ears, just blaring out this fantastic music with bass full on. Really, there's no other way to play it. You know, I mean, you can play it on Techno Parrot. It does a brilliant version, and that's the way that I get my fix these days. But you know, it's just not the same as the arcade as you're seeing here. And it's really sad because I never understood why this game hasn't seen more home ports. I mean, there was a PS2 port in 2007 and the PSP, and there was a PS3 version also in 2007, but it's based on the first game in the series, and whilst it's essentially the same story in the series, just isn't the same as playing the arcade original. It's quite a substandard port, really. But, you know, that fries my brain, because why? I think this would be such a popular series. Now, as I mentioned, Techno Parrot does do a great version of it, but really, yeah, that's the only way. I mean, they did have this in Arcade Club in Bury. That's where I fell in love with it. But sadly, the machine kept breaking down, and eventually one day it was removed. I don't know whether they're still trying to fix it, or whether it went to one of the other arcade clubs in the UK, either Leeds or Blackpool. But yeah, it's a shame, because I only have my memories of playing it and the wonderful video footage that I thankfully took whilst playing it one of the times when I was there. So I hope you enjoyed. Right, so there you go. There were my personal top 5 arcade games I've chosen for the letter W. Now, as I mentioned, I appreciate nostalgia has probably played a big role in a couple of my choices there, and other games like Willow, objectively, are the far better game. Say something like WWF WrestleFest. But ultimately, these are the 5 games that I would choose because I adore them. Still, as mentioned, there's loads of other great games for the letter W. So let's go through some of the great and interesting ones now. Alright, let's start up with the beat 'em up genre, and we've got some 2 classics worthy of your time. Firstly, we have to mention Warrior Blade, Rastan Saga, Episode 3 by Taito, and released in 1992. Now, the original 1987 Rastan Saga is one of my favourite arcade games, but after 1989 and the mess of Rastan Saga 2, I'd given up hope of a decent continuation of the game. Now, Warrior Blade isn't really that. It's not a classic like the original, but it's a semi-decent dual-screen 2-player beat-em-up in the same guise of Golden Axe, really. It's got nice graphics and nice variety, and you know, pretty solid, if not awe-inspiring gameplay. It's definitely worthy of your time. Another great beat-em-up is Warriors of Fate, aka Dynasty Warriors 2 by Capcom. Now, I did cover this and under its Japanese name of Tenchi wo Kurao 2. It also appeared as Sangokushi 2 in Asia. So it goes by lots of names, but this is the Western release, and therefore it's all in English, so you can at least finally understand, even though it's not exactly Shakespeare, what the people are saying in the various cutscenes. Now, it's a great update to the original with fantastic character design and fun gameplay. Now, today you can play it on the Capcom Arcade Stadium Collection, came out on the modern consoles, or via MAME, as you're seeing here. Okay, let's go on to the platformer genre, and again I've got some real gems for you. Now, first we have Willow, released in 1989 by Capcom and based on the LucasArts film of the same name. Now, to be honest, I'm someone who dislikes the movie, and therefore I've always skipped over this game, just thinking, oh, it's not for me. But playing it for this video, I quickly became addicted and realised I was missing out on a real gem here. This is a really solid platformer with awesome graphics and nice variety and solid gameplay. And you know, if it wasn't that I came onto this so late and I don't have the nostalgic memories, this probably should have been in my top 5 if I'm honest. Now, another worthy platformer for your time is Wonder Boy in Monsterland, released in 1987. Now, this is a really strange arcade game, with it feeling more like a console action RPG than a typical arcade game. It was published by Sega and developed by West One, and it has multiple solid home ports of the game, and in many ways that's really where it should sit. It plays better, in my opinion, as a console game or a computer game as opposed to an arcade game. Still, if you're looking for something a bit different in the arcades and that longer arcade game feel, then this is a great one to play. The final Wonder Boy in the arcades, at least, that was released in 1991 was Wonder Boy 3 The Monster Lair. This was also made by West One for Sega, and it goes back to its roots of the original game with force scrolling and simplistic gameplay. This is a fun update, but it's definitely missing something of its original charms. This version of the game did have a solid Mega Drive port and a PC Engine CD port as well. And finally, for platformers, I guess I have to mention it, it's the infamous Wardener by Toplin, which is published by Taito and released in 1987. The reason I say infamous is this is quite a divisive title in the RGDS podcast tower, because some of the hosts absolutely adore this game and truly love it. Where the rest of the hosts, myself included, rather sensibly see it for the turd / below average game that it is. I do get why there's some love for it, in all seriousness. It does have a lot of charms with the characters, but it's just that weird jump mechanics. There's just so much weird non-standard platforming in this that just frustrates. So it's not one that I personally would recommend, but for people like Rick, who's the host that adores this game, I felt I at least should mention it here in the video. And you know, you may find there's something to enjoy here. Okay, let's go and look at the shooter genre, and we've got some real belters for you here. The first one is Wild West COW Boys of Moo Mesa. Yes, that did spell cow. So Wild West Cow Boys of Moo Mesa. It's a brilliant run and gun game released in 1992 by Konami. And it's based on a really forgotten cartoon that only lasted 2 seasons. It was really weird why they chose to make a game based on it. The game plays like the cartoon. You are a group of mutated cows, obviously trying to play on the mutated turtles. But this time they've become cowboy lawmen, and so they go and take out the particular villains. Really, gameplay wise, this plays like Konami's Sunset Riders but with cows. And you must shoot and blast all your enemies and then take the outlaw boss at the end of the level out before moving on to the next location. It's a competent fun blaster. I do feel it's missing some of its charm from Konami's other more memorable IP, but that probably is because I have more of affinity with that IP, like Simpsons and Turtles. But you know, there's a lot of fun here. Now, one game that really worthy of time is Warp and Warp, also known as Warp Warp as well. Released in 1981 by Namco, and this was a total surprise to me when going through all these games. It's really, really addictive. And in level 1, it's a simple screen shooter where you must kill the enemies and avoid their own fired bow and arrows at you. But in level 2, it really impressed me because it's the maze level, and here you basically run around dropping bombs, and depending on how long you press the fire button depends on the timer of the bomb. And the idea is that you destroy the enemies. Yes, you heard me. In 1981, years before, well, a couple of years before Eric and the Floaters by Hudson or the Bomberman games, There was essentially a Bomberman game that Namco had created that nobody seems to ever talk about. In fact, Eric and the Floaters is always seen, including in the past by me, as the original Bomberman game, and that's true, but they weren't, Hudson, as it's apparent, the first people to do that concept of dropping bombs and blowing up the enemy. Now, I should note as well as, this is a great addictive game, but there's also a sequel that came out on the Famicom. It sent me down the whole different rabbit hole. It came out in 1985, and it's a sequel called Warpman, and it adds on this arcade premise even more, with more options and things, and that is such an enjoyable game to track down as well. Now, talking of fun classics, then there's the original Wizard of War, that's WOR, released in 1980 by Midway and developed by David Nutting Associates. In the game, you and a friend run round a maze and shoot the dragons and monsters before they kill you. Simple enough. Rack up the kills on the most dead creatures to win. And yeah, that is it really. I mean, it's just simple fun, but it's really addictive, and of course even better if you have a second player played by a human, because otherwise it's by the computer and it's not the same. Now, World Wars, known as Bermuda Triangle also by SNK, came out in 1987 by them, and this is the same development team that worked on ASO Armored Scrum Object, which is another shooter that I like from this period. What can you say about this? It's a competent, fun blaster. It's not going to rock people's worlds, but it's enjoyable enough and worthy of a mention. Then we have the never released prototype Wing Force by Atlas Software and developed in 1993. The game's nothing special again, but I really enjoyed it as a quick blast, and because it's one that no one ever talks about, I thought I'd mention it here. Finally, for shooters, we have Wild Gunman by Nintendo. Well, actually there's two versions. The first version came out in 1974 and was much like an early prototype of Mad Dog McGree years later, with real footage projected on the cowboys, and it would give points and the correct visuals for the correct shot. Decades ahead of its time, and it's really important to Nintendo's history. I mean, this became a big deal in Japan, and it was their first real foray into video gaming itself, even though it's not really video gaming, it's projector based, but very, very important to their history and therefore gaming history, this version of the game. Now, of course, to honour it, years later on the NES, Nintendo released Wild Gunman as well in 1984. Now, in the arcades, technically, it was only a PlayChoice 10 NES game. Normally, I don't include those, but I had to because, mainly because it appears in the 80s rock calf of Back to the Future Part 2. And also Elijah Wood's probably his first cameo, yes, he of Frodo, Lord of the Rings, as a kid, featuring in that clip. So I was desperate to show that clip and show Marty McFly play that game of Wild Gunman. So let's have a look at some of the brilliant fighting games for the letter W. Now, one fighting series that's worthy of your time is World Heroes series, developed by Alpha Denshi and published by SNK and Neo Geo. Now, beginning in World Heroes in 1992, I mean, I'll be the first to say it was a rip-off of Street Fighter 2. But what was cool is it had real world, or close to real world, fighters from history and the contemporary. So if ever you've wanted to see who would win in a fight between Hulk Hogan, Muscle Power, or Rasputin, then this is for you. It did have sequels such as World Heroes 2, released in 1993. This increased the roster to 14 and added even more. World Heroes 2 Jet is also brilliant, adding 2 more fighters. It's probably my favourite of the series. Their final one was World Heroes Perfect. They came out in 1996, 2 years later. It has all the 16 characters of World Heroes 2 Jet, and just adds a couple of modes of play. It is good, World Heroes Perfect, but something feels off. It might be just the period that it came in. It was looking outdated at the time, but yeah, for me, World Heroes 2 Jet is my favourite. Another fighter is Sunsoft's 1996 game Waku Waku 7, which has characters that are fun parodies of famous manga and anime. characters. Now incidentally, in Japan, whenever you hear the words repeated like waku waku, it means it's describing a sound. So in this case, waku waku is the sound of excitement. Anyway, that brings us on to the WWF arcade games that aren't WWF WrestleFest. First, we have the awesome WWF Superstars, released in 1989 by Technos. This only had 6 wrestlers to choose from and smaller characters to WrestleFest, but it had all the main characters you wanted to be, and it is a better game in my opinion. I think the smaller characters just plays better, less of a button masher. Now it's made by Yoshihisa Kishimoto of Double Dragon director and fame, and so it's interesting to see what he went on to do after Double Dragon. This is well worthy of your time and one that I definitely recommend you give a replay. Then you have, of course, WWF WrestleMania, released in 1995 by Midway. This essentially takes Mortal Kombat meets Pit Fighter and sticks wrestlers' skins on it. So the characters are all digitised and they do look great. It's got my favourite wrestler that I always loved back in the day, Bret the Hitman Hart, and it's nice to see The Undertaker here as well. But for me, this era of WWF I'm less nostalgic for. Most of the characters don't resonate with me, and quite frankly, gameplay wise, it feels more of a brawler. It feels more like Pit Fighter than wrestling game. So I just never really gelled with this. Now finally for fighters we have Sega and THQ's WWF Royal Rumble. This features 19 wrestlers of the Attitude Era, including The Rock, Stone Cold, Steve Austin, Mankind, Triple H, The Undertaker, Edge and Chris Jericho and Kane, to name just but a few. But this time it's in 3D, and to be honest, I'd moved beyond WWF at this point. I was less interested in it at this point. So I've never really gelled with 3D wrestling games or these particular wrestlers. Yes, I know, it's me. I'm stuck in the 80s and my childhood when it comes to wrestling and most things, quite frankly. Okay, let's look at sports games, and there's some really interesting ones that are worthy of a mention. Now, one most people will know, of course, is Windjammers, released by SNK in 1984 and developed by Data East. This basically does frisbee tennis, mixing in elements of Pong, and it's a really fun 1 or 2 player game, particularly 2 player. Like all sports games, as I say, it does need that human player of a similar skill to become a real classic. But this is a great fun version, and it's a great one to play with your mates. There is great copies or ports of it on the Switch and PS4, and they also did a sequel. Now another gem is YY Jockey Gate Inn by Jalico and released in 1984. YY means loud noise din. That's basically what YY means, and this was a pure joy of discovery for me. It's a really simple game. You choose your horse to race on and you limit your whipping to the whole race. You've already got so many whips that you can do on the poor horse to try and get to the front, and you do the jumping at the right time to jump over the gates, etc. But I just became addicted to it. There's just something about the cute characters and characterization, and it just drips in charm that I just couldn't stop playing it. And it's one I urge you to track down and give it a go, because I guarantee, probably like me, most of you won't have played that game. So let's go on to the next game, and it's Winter Heat by Sega in 1997. It's a Winter's Olympic game. I remember it fondly on my Sega Saturn. It's competent enough. You can play it on the Sega Model 1 emulator. It's just not a genre that I personally gravitate to, but it is well done for what's here. And finally for sports game we have Winning Soccer Winning 11 by Konami. Now this obviously became sort of like PES and eventually in the series, and this is the first arcade game in the series, which came out in 2002. I'm not going to go through all the sequels. It's a football game. I mean, it's not for me, but I know how fondly loved PES is by Konami and people, so I thought I should at least mention it. It is a good football game. It's just not my sort of genre or thing. Wow, there were some amazing games there anyway, but let's go on to the final section for the letter W, and it is of course racing, and in many ways I've saved the best ones for last. To start with, there's the solid but overlooked racer WEC Le Mans 24 by Konami. Now it came out in 1986 and just got overshadowed by Outrun back in the day, but it's a shame because yes, it wasn't as accessible as Outrun. It took a more harder, more realistic approach to racing. You actually had to use a brake and things. But it uses real tracks, but it's really solid. I mean, super fast, much faster really than Outrun, and it's a lot of fun to play. I mean, it's one that when I go to Arcade Club in Bury, I usually give it a bit of time. Just takes a little while a few playthroughs to get used to not driving it like you do, like with Sega arcade racers. It did have lots of home ports, particularly the Spectrum one was very good, but of course you can play it on MAME or visit Arcade Club in Bury. Either way, very recommend giving it a go. And likewise, actually, there is a sequel to WC Le Mans that most people don't know about. It's called Racing Force High Speed Circuit and came out in 1994. It carries the same brutal racing mechanics of that original, but with better visuals, and it's well worth giving that a little go as well. Now, another impressive racer by Namco in 1988 was Winning Run. This is beautifully fast and, you know, well ahead of its time in terms of flat texture. I mean, you compare it to, like, I don't know, Atari's hard driving of the similar time. It's all thanks to the Namco System 22 arcade board, which was brand new for this game. And, you know, it is one of the first 3D racers. It's undeniable in the arcade. It didn't have changing views and it was a hand-drawn car, so that's why often, you know, if you watch the letter V, I sort of had said that it's, you know, that was the first true, fully playable 3D sort of racing game in the arcade. But, you know, undeniably this is well ahead of its time and a real classic. Now, they would follow it up with Winning Run Suzuka Grand Prix in 1989, featuring a Suzuka track as well. And then they did Winning Run 91, of course, came out in 1991, tweaking the gameplay further. Overall, it's an overlooked classic series. It just didn't really take hold in the West, and given that it never really saw a home port, it's passed a lot of people by, so well worth giving that a go. Then there's, of course, Winding Heat, released in 1996 by Konami. This is a solid racing game, being kind of like a versus game, a bit like Initial D. Not as good in my opinion, but worthy of your time to give a quick go to. Then we have Sega's Wave Runner, released in 1996. This has you jet ski across Sega blue skies and locales. The game is a huge amount of fun and was hugely popular at the time in the arcade, so I find it really bizarre it never ever saw a home release. Thankfully, Sega Model 1 emulator runs it perfectly, so that's a great way to play it. Incidentally, the game also got a sequel, Wave Runner GP, released in 2001 by Sega. This was on the Sega Naomi boards and so offered improved visuals and more tracks. Sadly, though, the proposed Dreamcast version never got released. Only a prototype is out there. But thankfully, you know, most Dreamcast emulators also emulate the Naomi board, so you can play through using that. Now, rewinding the clock back a bit here, and we have Water Ski, released by Taito in 1983. This is a surprisingly fun overhead little racer where you not only must dodge and jump the obstacles, but you also must contend and think about the ever increasing speed of the powerboat, but also not getting the rope between you and the powerboat getting tangled up in any of the obstacles, so there's an extra element. Now, the game did have a really good home port on the Atari 7800, or it can be played via MAME, as you see here. It's a real cute little gem and worth at least 5 minutes of your time. Now, talking of fun, World Rally by Spanish developer Gaelico, released in 1993, and this is a really good sort of isometric little rally racer. It's got gorgeous graphics and nice variety to all the tracks. Now, fantastically, this does appear on the Evercade Gaelico Arcade Volume 1, so you can own this game legitimately, and it's well worth giving a go, or you can play it on MAME, as you're seeing here. Now, they did do a two-player sequel of this game called World Rally 2, released in 1995. Now, this offered more of the same with variety in visuals and obviously two-player, and I think this is a superior version, and this does appear on the Evercade Gaelico Arcade Volume 2 Evercade cartridge, so that's another way you can play this game legitimately. Right, okay, so let's go to our final one. I'm going to give an honourable mention to, well, series really, because of course it is the Wangan Midnight Maximum series basically, and to be honest, every version retells the same story pretty much. It adds visuals, additional tracks and music. Most, not all, can be played either. The early ones can be played on like the PS2 and PS3, and some of the later ones can be played thankfully on Techno Parrot, because it never ever saw a home release, which needs to be done. I think it would be hugely popular to release Wangan Midnight. But as you can see here, there's some amazing ones, and let me just take you through these clips of all the series to give you an idea. But while we're showing that, let's sum up. That was my top 5, and countless recommendations for the letter W. Let me know in the comments what you would have chosen though, because I would love to hear. I mean, some of the ones you've suggested in the past that perhaps I missed or whatever, really it's been wonderful, because I'm like you, love the voyage of discovery of these new games. Now don't forget, in the video notes I have a link to all my previous videos in this series, with it being a playlist. It's of course going right the way through from A to W now, so it's already a great watch, and soon you'll have the entire alphabet there to enjoy. Also, a reminder for those watching on the Drisk YouTube channel, just a heads up, all my new content, I mean, I've kept it running on this series because I wanted to finish it, but all my new content and loads of other content is on the RGDS podcast YouTube channel, which is my main channel moving forward. It's the one that sort of ties up with podcasts that I've been doing for many years. And it's great because it's not just me, there's a variety of other hosts that also do content on there. So please, consider subscribing to the RGDS podcast channel as well. That mean the world to me, and hopefully you'll really enjoy. And of course, one thing that it also includes is the video versions we've started to do of our audio podcast. Still only probably about 1% of our listeners or will actually watch the video version. It's not getting really particularly good views on it, but I think they're great because it gives, as we're talking through the podcast, the visual cues of what those games are, and I think it really elevates our audio podcast, which is why I'm still keen to do them despite the low viewership. But with that in mind, please consider, when you watch these videos, clicking like, subscribe to the new channel, and even commenting. I can't tell you, I mean, there's so much work goes into these videos. I can't tell you how much a kind comment or a like or a subscription really means the world to me. It makes the effort of putting these videos together just worth it. So and of course, beyond that as well, beyond it just being personally nice for me, it really does help get the videos noticed. YouTube's algorithm, it looks at any comments, any replies. It looks at not just viewership but also engagement, as it calls it, like likes and things. So it really will help get the videos shown to other people and hopefully new discoveries of people, because I get it. Life's busy, and sometimes with some of the devices it's difficult to click these likes and things, but if you do get a chance, it'll mean the world. So thank you. But I hope you've enjoyed, and look out for the letter X in the arcades. It's going to be a short letter to do, but there's some real classics there that I can't wait to get my teeth into. So until next time, keep it retro.